We'll get right into the book here directly, but before I do, I just want to say this particular section, Part 6 of the Gunslinger Dark Tower Book 1, will be dedicated to Lady Fairfax. I sure appreciate your kind words. I appreciate the interaction that we've had. I will be considering the books that you've mentioned, and I just want to remind everyone, anything that you'd like to hear the ogre narrate, please leave in the comments, and everything will be taken into consideration. At the end of this book, I'll do a short video, have all the titles there, and you will decide what we listen to next. So, without any further ado, this is The Gunslinger Dark Tower Book 1 by Stephen King, narrated by The Laughing Ogre, Part 6. He thought Brown had fallen asleep. The fire was down to a spark, and the bird, Zoltan, had put his head under his wing. Just as he was about to get up and spread a pallet in the corner, Brown said, "There! You told it! Do you feel better?" The gunslinger started. "Why would I feel bad?" "You're human, you said, no demon, or did you lie?" "I didn't lie." He felt the grudging admittance in him. He liked Brown, honestly did, and he hadn't lied to the dweller in any way. "Who are you really, Brown? Really, I mean." "Just me," he said unperturbed. "Why do you have to think you're such a mystery?" The gunslinger lit a smoke without replying. "I think you're very close to your man in black," Brown said. "Is he desperate?" "I don't know." "Are you?" "Not yet," the gunslinger said. He looked at Brown with a shade of defiance. "I do what I have to do." "That's good, then," Brown said, and turned over and went to sleep. In the morning, Brown fed him and sent him on his way. In the daylight, he was an amazing figure, with his scrawny, burnt chest, pencil-like collarbones, and ringlet shock of red hair. The bird perched on his shoulder. "The mule?" the gunslinger asked. "I'll eat it," Brown said. "Okay." Brown offered his hand, and the gunslinger shook it. The dweller nodded to the south. "Walk easy." "You know it." They nodded at each other, and the gunslinger walked away, his body festooned with guns and water. He looked back once. Brown was rooting furiously at his little stand of corn. The crow was perched on the low roof of his dwelling like a gargoyle. The fire was down, and the stars had begun to pale off. The wind walked restlessly. The gunslinger twitched in his sleep and was still again. He dreamed a thirsty dream. In the darkness, the shape of the mountains was invisible. The thoughts of his guilt had faded. The desert had baked them out. He found himself thinking more and more about Court, who had taught him to shoot instead. Court had known black from white. He stirred again and awoke. He blinked at the dead fire with its own shape superimposed over the other, more geometrical. He was a romantic. He knew it, and he guarded the knowledge jealously. That, of course, made him think of Court again. He didn't know where Court was. The world had moved on. The gunslinger shouldered his tote sack and moved on with it. The Way Station. A nursery rhyme had been playing itself through his mind all day, the maddening kind of thing that will not let go, that stands mockingly outside the grasp of the conscious mind and makes faces at the rational being inside. The rhyme was, "The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. There is joy and also pain, but the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. Pretty, plain, loony, sane, the ways of the world all will change, and all the ways remain the same. But if you're mad or only sane, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. We walk in love, but fly in chains, and the plains in Spain fall mainly in the rain." He knew why the rhyme had occurred to him. There'd been the reoccurring dream of his room in the castle and of his father, who had sung it to him as he lay solemnly in the tiny bed by the window of many colors. She did not sing it to him at bedtimes, because all small boys born to the high speech must face the dark alone. But she sang to him at nap times, and he could remember the heavy gray rain light that shivered into colors on the counterpane. He could feel the coolness of the room and the heavy warmth of the blankets, love for his mother and her red lips, the haunting melody of the little nonsense lyric in her voice. It now came back maddeningly, like prickly heat, chasing its own tail in his mind as he walked. All his water gone, and he knew he was very likely a dead man. He had never expected it to come to this, and he was sorry. Since noon, he'd been watching his feet rather than watching the way ahead. Out here, even the devil grass had grown stunted and yellow. The hard pan had disintegrated in places to mere rubble. The mountains were not noticeably clear, although 16 days had passed since he had left the hut of the last homesteader, a loony, sane young man on the edge of the desert. He had a raven, the gunslinger remembered, but he couldn't remember the raven's name. He watched his feet move up and down, listened to the nonsense rhyme sing itself into a pitiful garble in his mind, and wondered when he would fall down for the first time. He did not want to fall, even though there was no one here to see him. It was a matter of pride. A gunslinger knows pride, that invisible bone that keeps the neck stiff. He stopped and looked up suddenly. It made his head buzz for a moment. His whole body seemed to float. The mountains dreamed against the far horizon. But there was something else up ahead, something much closer, perhaps only 5 miles away. He squinted at it, but his eyes were sandblasted and going glare-blind. He shook his head and began to walk again. The rhymes circled and buzzed. About an hour later, he fell down and skinned his hands. He looked at the tiny beads of blood on his flaked skin with unbelief. The blood looked no thinner. It looked mutely viable. It seemed almost as smug as the desert. He dashed the drops away, hailing them blindly. Smug. Why not? The blood was not thirsty. The blood was being served. The blood was being made sacrifice unto. Blood sacrifice. All the blood needs to do is run, and run, and run. He looked at the splotches that had landed on the hard pan and watched as they were sucked up with uncanny suddenness. How do you like that, blood? How does that grab you? Oh, goodness, you're far gone. He got up, holding his hands to his chest, and the thing he had seen earlier was almost in front of him, startling a cry out of him, a dust-choked crow croak. It was a building. No, 2 buildings, surrounded by a fallen rail fence. The wood seemed old, fragile, to the point of elvishness. It was wood being transmogrified into sand. One of the buildings had been a stable. The shape was clear and unmistakable. The other was a house or an inn, a waste station for the coach line. The tottering sand house, the wind had crusted the wood with grit until it looked like a sandcastle that the sun had beat upon at low tide and hardened into a temporary abode, cast a thin line of shadow, and someone sat in the shadow, leaning against the building, and the building seemed to lean with the burden of his weight. Him, at last, the man in black. The gunslinger stood with his hands to his chest, unaware of his declamatory posture, and gaped. And instead of the tremendous winging excitement that he'd expected, or perhaps fear or awe, There was nothing but the dim, atavistic guilt for the sudden, raging hate of his own blood moments earlier, in the endless ring-a-rosy of the child's song. The rain in Spain, he moved forward, drawing one gun, falls mainly on the plain. He came the last quarter mile at a run, not trying to hide himself. There was nothing to hide behind. His short shadow raced him. He was not aware that his face had become a gray and grinning death mask of exaltation. He was aware of nothing but the figure in the shadow. It did not occur to him until later that the figure might even have been dead. He kicked through one of the leaning fence rails. It broke in two without a sound, almost apologetically, and lunged across the dazzled and silent stable yard, bringing the gun up. "You're covered! You're covered! You're—" The figure moved restlessly and stood up. The gunslinger thought, "My God, he's worn away to nothing. What's happened to him?" Because the man in black had shrunk 2 full feet and his hair had gone white. He paused, struck dumb, his head buzzing tunelessly. His heart was racing at a lunatic rate, and he thought, "I'm dying right here." He sucked the white hot air into his lungs and hung his head for a moment. When he raised it again, he saw it wasn't the man in black, but a small boy with sun-bleached hair, regarding him with eyes that did not even seem interested. The gunslinger stared at him blankly, and then shook his head in negation. But the boy survived his refusal to believe. He was still there, wearing blue jeans with a patch on one knee and a plain brown shirt of rough weave. The gunslinger shook his head again and started for the stable with his head lowered, gun still in hand. He couldn't think yet. His head was filled with motes, and there was a huge, thrumming ache behind it. The inside of the stable was silent and dark, and exploding with heat. The gunslinger stared around himself with huge, floating wall eyes. He made a drunken about face and saw the boy standing in the ruined doorway, staring at him. A huge lancet of pain slipped dreamily into his head, cutting from temple to temple, dividing his brain like an orange. He reholstered his gun, swayed, put out his hands as if to ward off phantoms, and fell over on his face. When he woke up, he was on his back, and there was a pile of light, odorless hay beneath his head. The boy had not been able to move him, but he had made him reasonably comfortable. And he was cool. He looked down at himself and saw that his shirt was dark with moisture. He licked at his face and tasted water. He blinked at it. The boy was hunkered down beside him. When he saw the gunslinger's eyes were open, he reached behind him and gave the gunslinger a dented tin can filled with water. He grasped it with trembling hands and allowed himself to drink a little, just a little. When that was down and sitting in his belly, he drank a little more. Then he spilled the rest over his face and made shocked blowing noises. The boy's pretty lips curved into a solemn little smile. "Want something to eat?" "Not yet," the gunslinger said. There was still a sick ache in his head from the sunstroke, and the water sat uneasily in his stomach, as if it did not know yet where to go. "Who are you?" "My name's John Chambers. You can call me Jake." The gunslinger sat up, and the sick ache became hard and immediate. He leaned forward and lost a brief struggle with his stomach. "There's more," said Jake. He took the can and walked toward the rear of the stable. He paused and smiled back at the gunslinger uncertainly. The gunslinger nodded at him, and then put his head down and propped it with his hands. The boy was well made, handsome, perhaps 9. There had been a shadow on his face, but there were shadows on all faces now. A strange thumping hum began at the rear of the stable, and the gunslinger raised his head alertly, hands going to gun butts. The sound lasted perhaps 15 seconds and then quit. The boy came back with the can, filled now. The gunslinger drank sparingly again, and this time it was a little better. The ache in his head was fading. "I didn't know what to do with you when you fell down," Jake said. "For a couple seconds there, I thought you were going to shoot me." "I thought you were somebody else." "The priest?" The gunslinger looked up sharply. "What priest?" The boy looked at him, frowning lightly. "The priest. He camped in the yard. I was in the house over there. I didn't like him, so I didn't come out. He came in the night and went on the next day. I would have hidden from you, but I was sleeping when you came." He looked darkly over the gunslinger's head. "I don't like people. They fuck me up." "What did the priest look like?" The boy shrugged. "Like a priest. He was wearing black things." "Like a hood and cassock?" "What's a cassock?" "A robe." The boy nodded. "A robe and a hood." The gunslinger leaned forward, and something in his face made the boy recoil a little. "How long ago?" I... Patiently, the gunslinger said, "I'm not going to hurt you." "I don't know. I can't remember time. Every day is the same." For the first time, the gunslinger wondered consciously how the boy had come to this place, with dry and man-killing leagues of desert all around it. But he would not make it his concern. Not yet, at least. "Make a guess. Long ago?" "No, not long. I haven't been here long." The fire lit in him again. He grabbed the can and drank from it with his hands trembling the smallest bit. A snatch of the cradle song reoccurred, but this time, instead of his mother's face, he saw the scared face of Allie, who had been his woman in the now defunct town of Tall. How long ago? A week? 2? 3? The boy looked at him distractedly. "Yes." "Which one?" "A week or 2. I didn't come out. He didn't even drink. I thought he might be the ghost of a priest. I was scared. I've been scared almost all the time." His face quivered like a crystal on the edge of the ultimate destructive high note. "He didn't even build a fire. He just sat there. I don't even know if he went to sleep." Close. He was closer than he'd ever been. In spite of his extreme dehydration, his hands felt faintly moist, greasy. "There's some dried meat," the boy said. "All right," the gunslinger nodded. "Good." The boy got up to fetch it, his knees popping slightly. He made a fine, straight figure. The desert had not yet sapped him. His arms were thin, but the skin, although tanned, had not dried and cracked. "He's got juice," the gunslinger thought. He drank from the can again. "He's got juice, and he didn't come from this place." Jake came back with a pile of dried jerky on what looked like a sun-scoured breadboard. The meat was tough, stringy, and salty enough to make the cankered lining of the gunslinger's mouth sing. He ate and drank until he felt logy, and then settled back. The boy ate only a little. The gunslinger regarded him steadily, and the boy looked back at him. "Where'd you come from, Jake?" he asked finally. "I don't know," the boy frowned. "I did know. I knew when I came here, but it's all fuzzy now, like a bad dream when you wake up. I have lots of bad dreams." "Did somebody bring you?" "No," the boy said. "I was just here." "You're not making any sense," the gunslinger said flatly. Quite suddenly, the boy seemed on the verge of tears. "I can't help it. I was just here, and now you'll go away and I'll starve because you ate up almost all my food. I didn't ask to be here. I don't like it. It's spooky." "Don't feel so sorry for yourself. Make do." "I didn't ask to be here," the boy repeated, bewildered defiance. The gunslinger ate another piece of the meat, chewing the salt out of it before he swallowed. The boy had become part of it, and the gunslinger was convinced he told the truth. He had not asked for it. It was too bad. He himself, he had asked for it, but he had not asked for the game to become this dirty. He had not asked to be allowed to turn his guns on the unarmed populace of Tull. Had not asked to shoot Allie, her face marked by that strange shining scar. Had not asked to be faced with a choice between the obsession of his duty and his quest in criminal amorality. The man in black had begun to pull bad strings in his desperation, if it was the man in black who had pulled this particular string. It was not fair to ring in innocent bystanders and make them speak lines they did not understand on a strange stage. Allie, he thought. Allie at least had been into the world in her own self-illusionary way. But this boy? This doggone boy. Tell me what you can remember, he told Jake. It's only a little. It doesn't seem to make any sense anymore. Tell me. Maybe I can pick up the sense. There was a place, the one before this one, a high place, a place with lots of rooms and a patio where you could look at the tall buildings and water. There was a structure that stood in the water. A statue in the water? Yes, a lady with a crown and a torch. Are you making this up? I guess I must be, the boy said hopelessly. There were things to ride on in the streets, big ones and little ones, yellow ones, a lot of yellow ones. I walked to school. There were cement paths beside the streets, windows to look in, and more statues wearing clothes. The statues sold the clothes. I know it sounds crazy, but the statues sold the clothes. The gunslinger shook his head and looked for a lie on the boy's face. He saw none. I walked to school, the boy repeated fixedly. And I had a... His eyes tilted closed and his lips moved gropingly. A brown book bag. I carried a lunch, and I wore... The groping again, agonized groping. A tie. A what? I don't know. The boy's fingers made a slow, unconscious clenching motion at his throat, a gesture the gunslinger associated with hanging. I don't know. It's just all gone. And he looked away. May I put you to sleep? The gunslinger asked. I'm not sleepy. I can make you sleepy, and I can make you remember. Doubtfully, Jake asked, How can you do that? With this. The gunslinger removed one of the shells from his gun belt and twirled it in his fingers. The movement was dexterous, as flowing as oil. The shell cartwheeled effortlessly from thumb and index and second to second and ring to ring and pinky. It popped out of sight and reappeared, seeming to float briefly, and then reversed. The shell walked across the gunslinger's fingers. The fingers themselves moved like a beaded curtain in a breeze. The boy watched, his initial doubt replaced with plain delight, then by raptness, then a dawning mute blackness. The eyes slipped shut. The shell danced back and forth. Jake's eyes opened again, caught the steady, limpid dance between the gunslinger's fingers for a while longer, and then his eyes closed once more. The gunslinger continued, but Jake's eyes did not open again. The boy breathed with steady, bovine calmness. Was this part of it? Yes, there was a certain beauty, a logic, like lacy frettings that fringe hard blue ice packs. He seemed to hear the sound of wind chimes. Not for the first time, the gunslinger tasted the smooth, loaden taste of soul sickness. The shell in his fingers, manipulated with such unknown grace, was suddenly undead, horrific, the spore of a monster. He dropped it into his palm and closed it into a fist with painful force. There were such things as rape in the world. Rape and murder and unspeakable practices, and all of them were for the good, the bloody good, for the myth, for the grail, for the tower. Ah, the tower stood somewhere, rearing its black bulk to the sky. and in his desert-scoured ears, the gunslinger heard the faint, sweet sound of wind chimes. "Where are you?" he asked. "Jake Chambers is going downstairs with his book bag. There is earth science. There is economics, geography. There is a notepad, a pencil, a lunch his mother's cook, Mrs. Greta Shaw, has made for him in the chrome and formica kitchen, where a fan whirs eternally, sucking up alien odors. In his lunch sack, he has a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a bologna, lettuce, and onion sandwich, and 4 Oreo cookies. His parents do not hate him, but they seem to have overlooked him. They have abdicated and left him to Mrs. Greta Shaw, to nannies, to a tutor in the summer, and the school, which is private and nice and most of all white, the rest of the time. None of these people have ever pretended to be more than what they are. Professional people, the best in their fields. None have folded him into a particularly warm bosom, as usually happens in the hysterical novels his mother reads, in which Jake is dipped into, looking for the hot parts. Hysterical novels, his father sometimes calls them, and sometimes bodice rippers. "You should talk," his mother says, with infinite scorn from behind some closed door where Jake listens. His father works for the network, and Jake could pick him out of a lineup, probably. Jake does not know that he hates all professional people, but he does. People have always bewildered him. He likes stairs and will not use the self-service elevator in his building. His mother, who is scrawny in a sexy way, often goes to bed with sick friends. Now he's on the street. Jake Chambers is on the street. He has hit the bricks. He is clean and well-mannered, comely, sensitive. He has no friends, only acquaintances. He has never bothered to think about this, but it hurts him. He does not know or understand that a long association with professional people has caused him to take many of their traits. Mrs. Greta Shaw makes very professional sandwiches. She quarters them and cuts off the bread crusts so that what he eats in the gym period looks like he ought to be being served at a cocktail party with a drink in his other hand instead of a sports novel from the school library. His father makes a great deal of money because he's a master of the kill. That is, placing a stronger show on his network against a weaker show on a rival network. His father smokes 4 packs of cigarettes a day. His father does not cough, but he has a hard grin, like the steak knives they sell in supermarkets. Down the street, his mother leaves cab fare, but he walks every day. It doesn't rain, swinging his book bag, a small boy who looks very American with his blonde hair and blue eyes. Girls have already begun to notice him with their mother's approval, and he does not shy away with skittish little boy arrogance. He talks to them with unknowing professionalism and puzzles them away. He likes geography and bowls in the afternoon. His father owns stock in a company that makes automatic pin-setting machinery, but the bowling alley Jake patronizes does not use his father's brand. He does not think he's thought about this, but he has. Walking down the street, he passes Burnetto's, where the models stand dressed in fur coats and 6-button Edwardian suits, some in nothing at all. Some are bare naked. These models, these mannequins, are perfectly professional, and he hates all professionalism. He's too young to have learned to hate himself yet, but that seed is already there. It's been planted in the bitter cleft of his heart. He comes to the corner and stands with his book bag at his side. Traffic roars by. Grunting buses, taxis, Volkswagens, a large truck. He's just a boy, but not average, and he sees the man who kills him out of the corner of his eye. It is the man in black, and he doesn't see the face, only the swirling robe, the outstretched hands. He falls into the street with his arms outstretched, not letting go of the book bag which contains Mrs. Greta Shaw's extremely professional lunch. There's a brief glance through a polarized windshield at the horrified face of a businessman wearing a dark blue hat, in the band of which is a small, jaunty feather. An old woman on the far curb screams. She's wearing a black hat with a net. Nothing jaunty about that black net. It is like a mourner's veil. Jake feels nothing but surprise and his usual sense of headlong bewilderment. Is this how it ends? He lands hard in the street and looks at an asphalt-sealed crack some 2 inches from his eyes. The book bag is jolted from his hand. He is wondering if he skinned his knees when the car of the businessman wearing the blue hat with a jaunty feather passes over him. It is a big blue 1976 Cadillac with 16-inch wheels. It is almost exactly the same color as the businessman's hat. It breaks Jake's back, mashes his stomach, and sends blood from his mouth in a high-pressure jet. He turns his head and sees the Cadillac's flaming taillights and smoke spurting from beneath its locked rear wheels. The car has also run over his book bag and left a wide black tread on it. He turns his head the other way and sees a large yellow Ford screaming to a stop inches from his body. A black fellow who has been selling pretzels and soda from a pushcart is coming toward him on the run. Blood runs from Jake's nose, ears, eyes, rectum. His genitals have been squashed. He wonders irritably how badly has he skinned his knees. Now the driver of the Cadillac is running toward him, babbling. Somewhere a terrible, calm voice, the voice of doom, says, "I'm a priest, let me through. An act of contrition." He sees the black robe and knows sudden horror. It is him, the man in black. He turns his face away with the last of his strength. Somewhere, a radio is playing a song by the rock group Kiss. He sees his own hand trailing on the pavement. Small, white, shapely. He has never bitten his nails. Looking at his hand, Jake dies. And that will be it today. I went a little bit longer than usual because I wanted to get in the entirety of Jack's hypnotized recounting of his death, the death that opened a door into this world of the Gunslinger. So I just want to thank you all for tuning in, whoever you may be, wherever you may be. Hope you enjoyed this, the 6th installment of The Gunslinger, Dark Tower Book 1 by Stephen King, read by The Laughing Ogre.